In this episode, we sit down with Jay Schroder to discuss his book, Teach from Your Best Self. During this episode, Jay walks us through the importance of self reflection, how to create a balance between personal and professional lives as an educator, and the concept of radical acceptance. Well, good morning. My name is Kylie. I am Vice President for the Holistic Teaching and Learning Club.
Nice to meet you, Kylie.
Hi Jay, I'm Karishma. I am the secretary for the Holistic Teaching and Learning Club, and we both work for the Center of Holistic Education here at SOU.
Krishna, it's nice to meet you.
Nice meeting you.
Well, I'm Jay Schroder, and I've been teaching for 24 years, both in mainstream high school classes as well as alternative education, mostly in Southern Oregon. And I also have a black belt in karate. Been very fortunate to have some wonderful karate teachers. So I've been studying martial arts for about 25 years. And in addition, I've written a book called Teach from Your Best Self, A Teacher's Guide to Thriving in the Classroom. And I've been leading professional development. As of 2023 June, I'm no longer in the classroom. I'm working for Southern Oregon Regional Educator Network, which is a terrific organization. I'm so blessed to be able to work for them, getting to build Teach from Your Best Self and support more educators throughout Southern Oregon.
Can you tell us what the main premise of Teach from Your Best Self is?
Yeah. So the main kind of central idea is that the self that I bring to the classroom matters. The version of the self that I bring. By the self that I bring, when I say best self, I'm not talking about having it all together and being perfect all the time, but that somehow I'm able to respond to situations rather than react. My whole brain is available, my heart is open, and I'm able to meet situations from that kind of state. Uh, Education is very much a doing profession. There's so many things to do, and it's very easy for teachers to feel overwhelmed with everything there is to do. And when I'm very focused on all of the doing, I can end up with a very frazzled, harried, even impatient and irritable version of myself while I'm trying to get all this stuff done. That actually doesn't work. It doesn't work for me in the long run because it leads me down the road to burnout. And it doesn't work for my students because my students actually are craving my available, open presence. And that's actually what's going to lead them down the road toward learning much more effectively than if I'm bringing a self that's kind of compromised by all the things that I have to do.
And can you tell us a little bit about how you get yourself out of your burnout?
Yeah, yeah, there's so many things to think about in terms of getting yourself out of a burnout. So once you're in burnout, it's easier to prevent it. I'll tell you that it's easier to prevent burnout than getting yourselves out. But but once you're in it, just boy, taking time to prioritize the self that we bring matters so much. So I'll give you an example of one of the things that I learned when I was a very young new teacher. I had this day where I signed the first paper I ever assigned as an English teacher. So big essay. I took it home, took all the papers home to grade, and I recalled how my college professors were very great by writing all of these very insightful comments in the margins of my essays, and that helped me learn how to write better essays. It was a very encouraging process, and I thought I would be that kind of teacher. I wanted to be that person for my students. So I spent a whole Sunday. It was a beautiful Sunday, like it was gorgeous October day. And I graded papers all day long. And I wrote meticulous comments on the margin. And I used a pencil so I could erase and rewrite, trying to get just the right vibe of just the right way of commenting. And um, I ended up showing up for work the next day, passed out the papers, really looking forward to seeing how my students were going to respond to all of this work that I'd put in to trying to help them improve. And the thing was, as you probably can predict, they didn't even read the comments. They looked at the grade and then they stuffed the papers in their backpack. So this was a big turning point for me because it was showing me how I could deplete myself by doing things that actually didn't yield student learning. That didn't have anything to do with student learning. It was just something that I thought I should do as a teacher. So one of the principles that come out of that in Teach from Your Best Self is return on investment, ROI. In economics, if I'm going to invest money, I want to invest the minimal amount of money to get the maximum gains. So as teachers, I want to invest the minimal amount of time, energy, and attention to maximize learning. And so if I start looking at my whole job through the lens of ROI, how can I do this in a way that minimizes my expenditure and maximizes student learning? I'll start to make changes and I'll start to experiment. This is really trial and error, right? Experimentation, because going in, I don't often know until I try something. But if I'm just stuck with the same old ruts that I think I should do, I can easily just end up doing things that don't yield much student learning and deplete myself. There's one thing I didn't say in the background, which relates to all of this, and that's that I came into the profession with chronic fatigue syndrome. I already had the diagnosis. And I don't know if you know anything about that, but it's extremely debilitating. And I was dealing with brain fog, terrible headaches, crushing fatigue, digestive issues. But I just had this sense that if I could conserve energy in myself, my body could use it to heal. So looking at my entire job as how can I do this in a way that costs me the least, so that I have more energy, which I need to heal, and so that the job doesn't completely flatten me. Because I was committed, I was dedicated. I'm going to have a long, fulfilling career in education. I'm not going to let this wreck me. And so it really forced me to look at every single thing I did through that lens of how do I conserve myself? How can I teach more effectively? How can I maximize student learning and minimize my own expenditure?
Yeah, I think that is so important to really focus on the ROI, like the return on investment. If you're putting in all this energy and it's not really helping the kids, or the kids
Yeah.
aren't really appreciating it.
Yeah.
What practices do you recommend for teachers to engage in self-reflection and continuous growth?
Yeah, well, so for over 2 decades, I would wake up 45 minutes earlier than I needed to. I would prop myself up in bed, get my cup of tea or coffee, and start writing. And so I did this for over 2 decades. And I would write, sometimes I'd write poetry, and sometimes I would just like, gee, I'm having this issue or this problem. What am I going to do? And the more that I did this, it kind of, I don't know, it might sound strange, but it started feeling more like a kind of a communion with the mystery or with something greater than me or some version of myself that just was bigger than my little conscious mind. It really helped me cut through the fog of confusion or unclarity. It helped me see things I wouldn't otherwise see. It gave me new insights, new inspiration, new things to try that I may not have otherwise thought of if I just kind of got up at the last minute, jumped in the shower, and got to my job. I have to tell you, this took a lot for me because with chronic fatigue syndrome, on most days the hardest thing I did was get out of bed because I never felt rested, never. Always woke up feeling just completely, utterly exhausted, and the last thing I wanted to do was get up. But this had such a high ROI for me, such a high return for me personally, is to engage in this reflective writing practice every morning that I just kept doing it. And I think it's allowed me to become someone who has something to offer now. And I do incorporate quite a bit of writing now and Teach from Your Best Self because I can see the incredible value of doing that.
Can I ask you what the process of writing Teach from Your Best Self Like, how did you go about the process of writing it?
Mm. So that's a good question because I didn't think I was going to write a book. I thought I was really just creating a program for educators. I had kind of figured some stuff out and things were going really well for me in my classroom. And I was really content to close the door and work my magic and have that experience. But then after my father died, and this now was the death of both of my parents, he died in 2018. And then we spent a lot of 2019 kind of closing down the estate, which was actually very complicated. It really landed for me our shared mortality and the limited time that I have on this earth, and what am I going to do with it? You know, as Mary Oliver said in that poem, what are you going to do with your one wild and precious life? And I realized that it could be very easy for me to keep just teaching the way that I was and closing my door and doing my thing, and it would be fine. And then I would retire. But I just felt this kind of this urgency. I was seeing teachers struggling all around me. I knew I had something to offer. I didn't know how valuable it was, but it felt super valuable to me. So 2020, I started designing this uh, professional learning experience. And then the pandemic hit, and we were all locked down. And we were locked down for months on end. And so at that point, it was, are we ever going to meet in a room again together? Because it kind of felt like we maybe weren't. And I didn't know what the future held. So that's when I pivoted to working on the book. And so what I did was I took that morning writing time that I had already had this practice going on, and that all just went toward writing the book. And because I had this idea for the training, which I had pretty much outlined, I could take a lot of that. And basically, the first draft was just taking the training and kind of putting it into a book format. And then I shared it with my mentor, Paul, and he just was like, "This isn't grabbing people. This is not really showing who you are, and it's not going to do what you want to do. And you have to kind of cut through the noise." So I reworked it, and I spent a couple years just revising. And I got an editor. It was a long and personally challenging and beautiful process. And I'm proud of the book. I think it's the best thing I could have done.
So sorry to hear about the loss of your parents, but I'm so amazed that through all of that, it kind of pushed you to write and that you
Mhm.
were able to use those morning practices that you had already implemented in your to help write your book. If you had to choose someone who would inspire you to write or to read,
Oh, you mean like to read the book?
just in general, like who would inspire, like who's one of your favorite authors?
Okay, so one of the things that I did before I started writing the book is I said I need kind of a someone to emulate for their voice, right? Some effective voice, because I didn't know what the voice of the book was. And so I started going through, I was an English teacher, a lot of books. But I started going through all my favorite authors and reading and reading and reading. And believe it or not, I bumped into Ernest Hemingway again after not having read him for a long time, and was reading that and said, okay, that's it. And I read, so what I would do as part of my writing process for the book is I would sit and read Ernest Hemingway for about 10 or 20 minutes until I kind of got his voice and his syntax and his rhythm kind of in me, and then I would spend the rest of the time writing. And so that's actually an inspiration. I kind of was able to use his modeling of the way he was structuring sentences and the way that he was developing his paragraphs, and use that to write the book. And it was fun because I love Ernest Hemingway. So it kind of also gave me something to look forward to, because sometimes writing can be daunting, but no, I get to start reading, first thing, not start writing the blank page, but start reading something cool.
That is so amazing to hear, like that he was such an inspiration for you. It is really incredible what we can take from our favorite authors. I am a big reader, so I can understand how much inspiration they can provide.
Yeah.
So, how can educators balance their professional responsibilities with the need to maintain their best selves?
So that's a really good question. And, we hear a lot of times the importance of work-life balance, right, for educators. And part of me, I'm going to push back a little bit on this idea of balance. Because when I think of balance, I think of like, the Statue of Liberty holding the balances of justice, right? And you have these balances one on either side. The thing about balance is it's so much work to try to keep things in balance. If I put 1 grain of sand extra on one side of those balances, I'm out of balance. So I really don't want to strive for balance. It's a pain in the butt to try to manage that. What I need to do is what matters most. What's the first priority? The biggest, most important thing that allows other things to flow more smoothly. So my argument in Teach from Your Best Self is that the self that I bring actually matters more than what I do. And that if I do, or if I bring my best self, all of the stuff that I do is actually easier and costs me less energy. It's also tending to promote the best in my students, because if I'm bringing my best self just because of mere neurons, they're going to tend to respond to me from their best selves. So if I have my students responding from their best selves instead of resisting me, my job suddenly becomes much easier. This all kind of came out of a conversation I was having with my mentor, Paul. And it was right at the time I was earning my black belt in karate, and we were doing quite a bit of sparring. I'm not a large person, and I was, constantly feeling like a lot of times beat up by these larger, faster people with more experience, more developed black belts than I was. And what Paul told me was critical. He said, it doesn't matter as much that you succeed in hitting your opponent or blocking their attacks as much as can you stay composed, relaxed, and centered in the face of the attacks and then respond with the best that you have. And by shifting the orientation that like the most important thing is bringing this best self. Because if I'm bringing this best self, I actually have access to all my martial arts tools. I'm not just flailing and reacting because I'm slipping in the survival brain, just trying to win or trying not to lose or trying not to look bad. Then actually I'm more effective. And likewise in life and in teaching, it's not about balancing. It's about bringing my best self to everything that I do. And that makes everything that I do better. It makes me more effective. It also costs less for me. And I get to have experience more joy in the work that I'm doing.
Thank you. That's really amazing. So I have not had a chance to read your book yet, but everyone speaks really highly of it. But I am wondering, does it have any like practical strategies in it, like to being your best self? And if so, can you remember a time where you actually implemented your own strategies?
Yeah, I'll give you an overview of the book first so you have a sense of how it's set up. There's 4 parts. In part one, I'm laying out the landscape, what actually matters and why it matters. So first, we kind of have to get our head around why does it matter that I bring my best self? So we're talking about that. And then we also talk about the obstacles, the design of our brain, things like hurt spots, pressures from culture and so forth that can make it harder for us to stay in this best self and make it easy for us to kind of fall into a more harried, frazzled, burned out, depleted place. Once we lay out that, part two of the book are specific practices, things we can do in the classroom that I can incorporate in my teaching. It's going to make it easier for me to stay in that best self in the face of the challenges of the job. And I felt it was really important to have that because there's a lot of books around that are saying, well, we need to focus on self-care, but a lot of the things that they're focusing on are things that teachers have to do after the classroom. And when teachers are tired and exhausted, they just don't have the energy to go to that yoga class or to go to the gym or to do the things that they know to do. Part two is all practical strategies we can do while we're teaching. Part three, what happens in those really heated moments, like those moments that are potentially provoking or triggering even. Like I'm just about to lose my best self. What do I do? Or, I've tried all this stuff and still the student says or does the thing that kind of flips my lid. And now I'm starting to get reactive. What do I do? So that's part 3. And then part 4 is really kind of taking this broad contextual view and saying, are there things that I can implement in my life to create a more resilient best self for the long run so that I'm just less susceptible to these kinds of triggers and provocations? So that's kind of the layout of the book. And I'll tell you, I'll tell you the origin story of one of them, like one of the things in part 2 of the book. And this is chapters about radical acceptance. So I was a new teacher, but prior to becoming that teacher, I, of course, had ideas in my head about the kind of teacher I would be. And I had very fantastical ideas about how great I would be. And I knew that other teachers might struggle, but I wouldn't, because I would really get the kids and they would really appreciate me because of where I was coming from. And I would, I just had this idea of how it was going to be. And of course, my students were going to be fully engaged and very excited about my discussions, and the hands would fly up in the air when I posed a discussion question, and they would be super receptive. I had all that in my head. Of course, the reality was once I started teaching, that was not the reality. And what I found myself doing, which I didn't know I was even doing it at the time, I actually came at an epiphany a little bit later, is I was judging my students for not measuring up for how I thought they should be. So I thought in my mind I was holding high standards, and it's an easy mistake to make. I'm just holding high standards, but really I was judging them. And they, of course, resisted my judgment, which made everything even harder. And so I was resenting them, judging them. They were resenting me, judging me. And then one day it hit me like a freight train. I was standing up in front of this class, kids, and I was looking at them, and I had this like just realization. Something opened up, something shifted, and I said to myself, oh my, I'm not going to be able to reach these students and help them grow from where they are if I first don't accept them exactly as they are right now. That was huge. And I called it in my mind radical acceptance. And I hadn't heard of radical acceptance, so I thought I coined the term. No, it was coined way before me. But radical acceptance for me meant accepting things that at the moment can feel unacceptable, but I'm still going to just accept them because they're part of the fabric of reality that I'm meeting. Now, once I've accepted something, I start to have influence to make a difference in regard to it. If I don't accept it, I'm just inspiring it to resist me, right? But by accepting all of my students where they were, I could just like, oh, here's your starting point. That's cool. Oh, you're like, you hate school. Awesome. I'm accepting that as the starting point, and now let's grow together. So one of the pieces of that I realized later in retrospect was, and I coined this term, putting people into boxes of should. I had in my mind how they should be, and I had this box or this shape of judgment that I call in a box of should, and I was judging them because they didn't fit my box. So I'm a big proponent now of radical acceptance and not putting people into boxes of should, because for one, it feels terrible when other people do it to us, and we all know that. Two, it just makes people resist us. And three, when I'm resisting reality, it costs me so much energy. So remember, tying back, I had to learn how to do the job in ways that didn't cost me energy. And anything that had me resist or any emotion inside of me that was resisting an actual truth in the moment, was just wasting my energy. Terrible ROI, no student gains coming from it. So radical acceptance changed my teaching, and really it changed my life.
It's great to hear, Jay. Thinking back to your school years, do you feel like your teachers put you into these boxes and want to shape around you?
Oh.
Or can you go back to and reflect on that time?
Krishna, I love that question because it's not anything I had really ever thought about. Because I'm looking at this from the viewpoint of a teacher. So in my own teachers, I think it was really a mixed bag. Um, I had teachers that would put me into boxes of should. I had teachers that made me feel ashamed. I had teachers that would criticize or embarrass me. and try as a technique to try to get me to comply. But I also had teachers that were just absolutely glorious, and that were like wind under my wings that helped me believe in myself and helped me realize that I could do it. I think in some ways my college professors were the best for me in that way. And maybe I was mature enough to really appreciate what they were doing. I don't know, but a lot of the things that I tried to emulate as a teacher was stuff that I learned from my college professors because I really felt like they were for me. I wasn't just a number in a classroom. I wasn't just another head that they were teaching to. And I this is a different time. This was the 80s when I was going through school, the 70s and 80s. And so it was very much a kind of authoritarian. I'm the teacher. I'm just here to teach you. You're here to learn. There wasn't a lot of attempts to build relationships with students like there is now. It's more like we just did the work and showed up and kind of put up with it. And the students that were acting out, or the times that I did, there was definitely some boxes of should getting thrown around. I think it's still built into education, and I think um, it's just not something we talk about. So when teachers are faced with students that are making their job harder, we end up like this student shouldn't do that. It's just kind of a natural thing that our brain does. And then I act on that, but then I start to burn out as as more and more students do that because it's actually not an effective strategy for me to influence or change their behavior. I can't really judge them enough to where they're going to say, "Oh, well, you're right. No, maybe I should be differently." I'm just inspiring resistance. So that's a great question. I'll think more about that. Like, well, gee, what was it like for me?
Okay. That is incredible. Thank you. So we were wondering what kind of feedback have you received from like teachers, and if aspiring teachers have read your book, like what kind of feedback have
Mhm.
you received about your work?
Well, so when I led the first Teach from Your Best Self training, and I was still teaching full time in 2021, and the training itself, and we still use this model. It's an intensive in the summer, and then we meet throughout the school year to integrate all of the practices into our daily approach, so that we're not just. I went to a lot of trainings, and even if it was really good, I'd say I'd have good intentions to want to implement it, but then I'd meet the onslaught and then go back to my familiar ways because it was easier. So we need those monthly follow-ups. But I wasn't entirely sure. I knew I had something valuable for me, but could I convey it? Could I do it? So that was a trial, and the feedback was so overwhelmingly positive, just about brought me to tears. Oh, I have never ever in relationship to professional learning or professional development heard the word transformative ever used before, but they were writing that in their feedback that this changed my life. This I've had teachers tell me, Jay, if it wasn't for Teach from Your Best Self, I would have quit the profession. Thank you so much. And I just this actually spurs me. Like this is now fuel. Okay, how can I help this grow to reach as many teachers as possible? This is not my thing. This is just like how can we help more teachers? So the response has been overwhelmingly positive. Um, People do from time to time, like from across the country or other places, reach out to me and say, "This book changed my life. Thank you so much." I'll get an email from someone that I've never met. I just had one last week who now wants to bring Teach from Your Best Self to her community in Minnesota. So it's just been really very affirming and validating that this work it actually matters. It's making a difference. It's valuable for educators.
That is great to hear that the book is doing so great and that so many people are reaching out. Going back to the last question before
Mhm,
about your past experience, I can definitely relate. I think Kylie can too with our professors here at SOU. They're
mhm.
always talking about reflecting and thinking back. I think a question that Dr. Green might have, or Young Key has told us in the past, is to think back to our own education and then compare that to how we want to be in the future. How does you teach from your best self? Like, how is it different from the other books out there about self-care and about kind of focusing on yourself?
Well, for one, it comes at this question from like hard won blood, sweat, and tears experience. I've read just about any book that I can get a hold of around educator well-being and resiliency, and a lot of the stuff. It's valuable, it's good, but it's coming from more of an academic standpoint. And they're pointing to research, right, or they're pointing to ecology. They're coming from kind of an outside view in, and how can we help these teachers from the outside? Teach from Your Best Self was born through struggle. My struggle to heal myself of chronic fatigue syndrome in the face of a very stressful job. That's where it comes from. So it has that kind of grounded in the tough, the hard, the reality of what it's like to teach. It brings in things like martial arts. Martial arts taught me so much about teaching. Like, I was telling you about learning how to stay kind of calm, composed, and relaxed under the onslaught of an opponent's attack. Well, that's very much like teaching, because I realized in my class, as a classroom teacher, I'm under a barrage of things coming at me all at the same time. And it matters more that I stay composed in the face of that than it does if I do all the things that are coming at me. So it comes at this from a very unique perspective. The things in Teach from Your Best Self, I've not found anywhere else. A lot of it is not actually, I've never read an education book that talked about radical acceptance, for instance, though radical acceptance is out there, it's more seen as a spiritual thing. But learning how it can actually help me become a more effective, fulfilled educator sort of changes the conversation. So I think it's a dramatic difference. And I guess I'll say the other thing that makes it different is it's really a paradigm shift from doing to being in education. Um, my sense is that there's an unspoken kind of belief driving education, which is that students learn based on what teachers do. And so if that's true and students aren't learning enough, then we need to give teachers more and different things to do. And you do that long enough and it starts breaking the back of teachers with all the things they have to do. And it also compromises their ability to bring a centered, clear, open-hearted best self, because they're in survival, just trying to get through the day to do all the things. And I'm actually asserting the opposite. I'm saying, you know what? The self that I bring actually matters more, and that what we do rests on that. So if what I do is an expression of my being, I'm responding to the moment, I'm responding to the needs of my students, from this kind of clear, open, whole brain, whole body, mind, body, spirit uh, place, I'm going to be much more effective than I would if I'm just trying to like do all the things. And so I think it gives educators a reason for prioritizing their best self, because I think I present a pretty good argument in there about why that matters so much. And then it gives them tools and strategies for doing that as they're teaching, and tools and strategies for retaining that best self, even in moments that are super challenging. I've not seen any book that does that as well as this one does.
That's so great. I know that personal experience is really what sets people apart. You can talk all you want, but until you walk the walk, that you really are not going to understand.
As we bring our time here to a close, we were wondering, what is some piece of advice you would like to give to aspiring educators or even current teachers who are maybe struggling with burnout and taking time for themselves? What is some advice you would give to them right now?
Yeah, so the first thing, e- education is really kind of can be a very lonely profession. The system is set up so that we're siloed, meaning we're all doing our own thing in our own classroom. And other than like a lunch, for instance, there's really not a lot together. And sometimes those lunch conversations actually are just people trying to blow off steam. and can be kind of even negative. So it doesn't encourage joining. And in fact, any movie that I've seen that's celebrating an educator, they tend to celebrate the lone educator who, you know, who somehow by themselves in the face of cynical colleagues and in the face of a broken system manages to support all these students. And that's really not the way that we can have a sustainable career. I need to join with colleagues that are like-minded. I need to have reflective conversations with other colleagues about how things are actually going for them. Um, so joining really matters. Having friends, having people to do fun things with that are also in the profession, and being able to have real conversations about the job matters so much. And I guess the second thing, and I don't want this to sound arrogant, but to tell you, I've read all the books. I wrote Teach for Your Best Self because that's the book that I could have most used 20 years ago. That's the book, right? So I'm reaching back in time to my former self and saying, what book could really have benefited this young man? And that this is it. Uh, so I strongly encourage to not only read it, but read it in part of a book group and do the discussion questions, because this would create an opportunity to do things together as educators. There's discussion questions at the end of every chapter, and discuss those together, and meet every month or every week or whatever works out until you get through it, and then start to retune our practice so that we can thrive and so that this system does become sustainable for us.
Yeah, that's awesome. And I really like that suggestion. I actually a part of the club. I created a book club here on campus, and we're going to start meeting very soon. And I think a lot of us would benefit from reading this book. And I like how you mentioned the discussion questions. So I definitely think this needs to be added to the mix. I think it could be really, really helpful for all of us as aspiring educators.
Yeah, to piggyback off of that, I think it's great that you mentioned having that sense of community and that support. I'm not in the classroom yet. From my
Mhm.
experience in it and from my memories, I can always remember hearing that the lunchroom was always a pretty negative space to talk about, kind of blowing off that steam instead of
Mhm.
positive and kind of joining together. And I think it's also great that you mentioned that a lot of movies and the media portrays like the teacher that is out here by themselves making a difference when it really takes a community to do that.
Yeah, it's so true, and kind of a model for this. I think of Erin Gruel, who did amazing work. I don't know if you've seen the movie Freedom Writers or read the book, but she did some just awesome work with these kids, and these were, inner city kids that weren't given a lot of opportunities, and she gave them a voice, and she helped them feel like they mattered, and their voice actually does matter. But she gave them that avenue, and she worked, I think, 2 years. She did a lot of the work to develop that program as a student teacher. And then she worked 2 years. And because she threw herself so far into the job, she ended up leaving the profession. And I just think about the difference she could have made if she had a 30-year career, right? If it's just easy in education for us to say, no, no, it's all about the kids. And then I end up kind of depleting myself trying to do all the things, forgetting about the kids 10 years from now. They're going to need me just as much. I need to, in order to reach those kids and to get to those kids in 10 years, I need to take care of the teacher that I am right now. And part of that is joining with a community of other educators and supporting each other.
I love watching Freedom Riders. It's a really good movie and it makes me cry every single time. But in that movie, it's a perfect example of how if you're focusing on like the classroom and you're not taking care of yourself, how your life kind of crumbles or disintegrates.
Yeah, I think sure her relationship blew up. It was like, all this stuff, but She did this noble, beautiful, heroic thing. It's just that as human beings, we really can't sustain that for very long. We need to prioritize ourselves.
So now, here's our concluding question. Are you making a movie? What's going on now?
Well, I don't have any plans, but I'm very influenceable by what other people think that would help make the biggest difference with this. So I feel delighted that I've gotten to work with the MAT program this year at SOU. So Teach for Your Best Self, we're piloting, bringing that into the program. That has been super exciting to me because I love working with future teachers. And that's relatively new, so that's super cool. I'm continuing to run cohorts. I'm building partnerships with people out of area to run Teach for Your Best Self programs outside of Southern Oregon. So we're kind of growing it that way. And then I have a leadership cohort, which I love. I'm meeting with them tomorrow. We meet once a month, and those are educators that have taken the original year of Teach for Your Best Self and now have applied to want more. And so having kind of taken care of ourselves, now what can we do together to develop our leadership skills so that we can start to reform education so that it is more sustainable, so that we can look at actually the things that matter in education and have a voice and have a collective influence on decisions that are being made and make a difference for other educators. So I'm just excited about that group. I love meeting with them because they inspire me.
That is great. Well, thank you so much. It's been so nice to sit and talk with you. Everything's been so inspiring, and definitely you're leaving us with so much to think about and so much good information to go into our careers with. So we really appreciate it.
It is my pleasure, Kylie and Karishma. Thank you for taking the time to chat with me. And I guess the other thing I'll say is I'm a resource, so you're welcome to put my contact in the show notes or whatever, and people can reach out. I'm available to support educators. That's kind of the passion of my life right now.
That's awesome. Thank you so much. We definitely appreciate that.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jay.
You're welcome. Have a great day.